My name is Ellen Keating. I'm 63. I was halfway through folding a motel towel when my phone lit up on the nightstand. The room smelled faintly of bleach and rain, the kind of scent that never quite leaves old carpets. I glanced at the screen, expecting another scam text or a weather alert. Instead, I saw my daughter's name. The message was short. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. There was a second one, almost playful. Let's see how brave you are now. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. The air in the room thinned until it hurt to breathe. My hand went cold around the phone, as if the words had stolen the heat straight out of my skin. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning under me, and read it again slowly, in disbelief. The way you reread a bad diagnosis hoping a single word will change the meaning. Rain ticked against the window like a clock I hadn't noticed before. I could hear the distant hum of trucks passing on the highway, people going somewhere anywhere other than here. I should have cried. That's what mothers do when they lose something, isn't it? But nothing came. No tears, no voice, only a strange stillness that wrapped itself around me like a heavy coat. The silence inside my chest was worse than the storm outside. I thought about the house on Hawthorne Street, my house, or what I had believed was mine. The porch light my husband, Mark, had wired himself before cancer dimmed his hands. The creak of the back door that he always meant to fix. The maple tree out front that Marissa, my daughter, used to climb until I begged her to come down. That house had been the stage for every version of our family Christmas dinners. Scraped knees, teenage arguments that ended with slammed doors and tearful apologies. It was the one thing I had held on to after Mark died. And now, with one message, she'd erased it. I pressed the phone to my chest as if I could hold the house there, inside me, safe. But even that small act felt ridiculous. What kind of mother gets evicted by her own child? I imagined her typing those words, the careful punctuation, the little pause before any more. She'd always been precise, my practical, capable Marissa. She got that from me. I used to think. A drop of rain slid down the glass, tracing the reflection of my face. I barely recognized the woman staring back, gray roots showing, eyes dull with fatigue, shoulders slightly hunched, a teacher's posture after too many years of keeping classrooms quiet and orderly. I'd spent my life believing in structure rules, routines, reason, but nothing about this had logic. The motel heater coughed to life, rattling in protest. I got up, unplugged it, and sat back down. The glow from the phone screen dimmed to black. My hands itched to call her, to say something, anything, but I knew my voice would shake. And she'd hear it. She'd take that weakness and call it proof. I could almost hear her husband, Colin, in the background. That smooth, persuasive tone he used when talking about financial practicality. He'd been pushing for control since Mark's funeral, offering to help with the paperwork, telling me that old properties needed younger minds. I'd trusted him, trusted her. I rubbed my thumb over the cracked phone case, thinking of the key that still hung on my ring, useless now, for years. That key had been part of my hand, metal warmed by routine. I didn't know what to do without it. Outside, a truck splashed through a puddle, its headlights sweeping briefly across the room. The light caught the photo on my nightstand Mark and me on the day we finished painting the shutters. He had a smudge of blue on his cheek. I reached out, tracing that spot with my finger. You'd laugh at this, wouldn't you? I whispered. He'd probably tell me not to give up so easily. He'd remind me how many times we'd rebuilt what life tried to take away. The thought steadied me. I slid the phone into my bag, zipped it shut, and sat very still, listening to the steady rhythm of rain. Somewhere beyond that downpour stood a house with my name carved quietly into its bones. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way back to what was rightfully mine. I turned off the light. The room sank into darkness, and the rain grew softer, almost like applause fading at the end of a play. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would start with a plan, but tonight, I would let the silence have me just once before I began again. The clock on the bedside table blinked 11:58. I lay back, eyes open, waiting for morning. Hawthorne Street always smelled faintly of wet leaves and wood smoke. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the sound of hammers echoing from the autumn we built the house, Mark whistling off key while I held the ladder steady. We couldn't afford a contractor, so we learned as we went, making mistakes that became part of the foundation itself. The porch rail still had a faint curve from where I measured wrong, and Mark refused to fix it. "It's our fingerprint," he said, smiling. "Proof that human hands built this place." The year was 1986. We were newly married, living off a teacher's salary and Mark's mechanic shop paychecks. We bought the lot because it was all we could afford, a small slope near the end of the street, bordered by a row of old maples that turned the neighborhood gold every October. It didn't look like much then. Mud, gravel, and the bones of a dream, but to us, it was everything. We spent the first winter living in a camper parked beside the construction site. I remember heating soup on a portable stove and brushing sawdust off our clothes before crawling into bed. On nights when the wind howled through the gaps in the half-built walls, Mark would say, "Someday, this sound will be outside our windows, not inside our lives." By spring, the frame rose like a promise. He let me choose the shutters sky blue against his better judgment. "It'll fade," he warned. "Then we'll paint it again," I told him, and we did. Every few years, through layoffs, anniversaries, and birthdays, we stood together with brushes in hand, laughing about how that color never stayed true. When Marissa was born, I planted a maple in the front yard, a slender sapling that barely reached my shoulder. Mark built her a swing from a piece of old tire and hung it from one of the lower branches. I can still see her feet kicking through the air, her small hands clutching the rope. Hair shining like copper in the sun. She used to call the house our fort, because to her, every corner held a secret closets that became castles. Hallways that turned into racetracks for her toy horses. Years passed the way life does quietly. Then all at once, Mark's hair turned gray before mine. His hands stiffened from years of work. When he fell ill, he sat on that porch every morning, wrapped in his old flannel, watching the sun rise through the trees we planted together. Even as his body weakened, he'd tap the porch rail and say, "Still standing, just like us." After the funeral, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Everyone told me it was too much house for one person, that I should downsize, start fresh. But every board and window carried his voice. Selling it felt like selling the years we'd fought for, so I stayed. I tended the garden, repainted the shutters, paid the mortgage on time. I taught extra classes to cover the property taxes. The work anchored me. Marissa offered to help. She was 29 then, ambitious and sharp, already building a career in real estate. "You shouldn't worry about all the legal stuff," she'd said over coffee one morning. "I can handle the paperwork. Mom, just sign where it says so it's easier for refinancing." I signed. Of course I did. She was my daughter. She had Mark's eyes. Now, in the silence of this motel room, I can still feel the texture of that pen in my hand, the faint tremor of trust running through my fingers. I never imagined that a simple signature could carry the weight of a goodbye. The house on Hawthorne Street had once been our fortress, but somewhere along the way, love turned into property, and home became something that could be taken away. Marissa used to fill the house with noise, laughter, chatter, the thud of running feet echoing up the staircase. I remember the mornings when she'd come bounding into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, clutching her latest school project. Once, It was a model volcano made of paper mache and vinegar. She spilled red dye across the counter, shrieked, and then giggled so hard she hiccuped. Mark wiped up the mess and winked at me. "She's got your persistence," he said. She did. From the start, Marissa was determined. A small storm of curiosity and confidence. When she decided she wanted to learn the violin, we couldn't afford lessons. So she practiced on a borrowed one from her school. I would sit on the porch, correcting papers, while the thin, wobbly notes drifted through the window. They were sharp and off-key, but I loved every sound. It meant she was trying. Every milestone was stitched into the rhythm of that house. Birthday cakes that never quite rose in the middle. The smell of glue and glitter from late-night science fairs. I still have the photo of her at 13, standing in front of her project on how sunlight affects plant growth. She was holding her blue ribbon like it was the world itself. Hair tied back. Cheeks pink from pride. Back then, I thought our bond was unbreakable. We argued sometimes, the way mothers and daughters do about curfews, about friends who weren't a good influence, about her insistence that she'd never need anyone's help. But no matter how tense the moment, it always ended the same, with her head resting on my shoulder, her voice small and sincere. "I love you. Mom, you know that, right?" I did know, or at least, I believed it. The first real change came slowly, like paint peeling from an old wall. When Marissa met Colin Holt, she was 27 and thriving. She'd just earned her real estate license and was working at a small brokerage firm downtown. Colin was older by 7 years, polished in a way that set him apart from the boys she used to date. He drove a dark sedan that smelled faintly of leather and cologne, and his handshake was the kind that told you he'd already made up his mind about you. The night she brought him home for dinner, I noticed how easily he took up space. He complimented the house before he even greeted me properly, called it an undervalued gem in a rising neighborhood. Mark would have smiled politely and changed the subject. But I felt my stomach tighten. Marissa laughed at everything Colin said, even when his jokes weren't funny. When he talked about flipping old houses, her eyes lit up in a way that unsettled me. After that night, she visited less often. When she did, she brought Colin. He'd walk through the house like an appraiser, tapping the door frames, asking about square footage, what the roof was worth. He said it was a shame to leave so much equity sitting idle. Once, I caught him taking photos of the backyard on his phone. "Just ideas for landscaping," he said smoothly. Marissa didn't notice or didn't want to. She'd changed her hair, her wardrobe, even the way she spoke. The warmth in her voice was replaced with something rehearsed, clipped, like she was constantly negotiating. I tried to tell myself it was just adulthood, the inevitable distance between generations. But sometimes, when she looked at me, her expression carried a quiet impatience, as though I were another task to be managed. One Sunday afternoon, she came alone, holding a stack of papers. "Colin says it's smart to put everything in joint names. Mom," she said, "for refinancing. Protection. You know, in case anything happens." I hesitated, reading the lines I barely understood. Her smile was practiced but kind. "It's just paperwork." She said, "You trust me." "Don't you?" I did. "I always had." She kissed my cheek before leaving, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway long after the door shut. I watched her car pull away, tail lights glowing red against the dusk. The house felt quieter than usual that night, the kind of quiet that seeps into the walls and doesn't leave. Somewhere between her laughter and those documents, my daughter had begun to drift into a world I couldn't reach, a world where love and loyalty had started to sound like transactions. Grief does strange things to time. After Mark's death, the days didn't move forward. They only looped. I woke, worked, ate, and slept. but every moment circled back to the same empty chair at the kitchen table. His jacket still hung by the door. His coffee mug sat on the counter, stained with the faint outline of his last morning. I told myself I was keeping things the same to preserve him. But really, I was too afraid that changing anything would mean admitting he was gone. Marissa handled the funeral arrangements. She was calm, efficient, too calm, maybe. I watched her stand at the edge of the grave, black gloves folded neatly in her hands. Her face unreadable. When friends stopped by afterward, they spoke about how composed she'd been, how proud I must be of her. Pride wasn't the word I felt. I was grateful, yes, but there was a hollowness beneath it, as if we'd buried more than one person that day. Weeks later, she came over one Sunday with her husband, Colin. They brought takeout and 2 bottles of wine. It was the first time the house had seen company since the funeral, and I tried to make myself presentable. I even set out the good plates, though my appetite was gone before we sat down. Colin talked most of the evening about the market, about long-term investments, about how lucky I was that Mark and I had bought when property taxes were still reasonable. Real estate is legacy, he said, twirling his glass. You two built something solid. It'd be smart to protect that. Marissa reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. Colin's been helping me look at refinancing options, she said gently. You could save on property taxes if we refile under both our names. It's just paperwork, Mom. Nothing changes, really. I wanted to ask more, but the words tangled with exhaustion. I'd been teaching half days again, pretending normalcy. Grief has a way of dulling judgment. Like fog on glass you can still see, but not clearly enough to notice the edge of a cliff. I nodded and murmured something about trusting her. The following week, she returned with a folder tucked under her arm. I remember how clean the pages looked, how official. She'd even placed colored tabs where I needed to sign. Colin stood beside her, offering the pen, his tone light. We'll handle the rest through my firm, he said. It's mostly a formality. Marissa smiled, that bright, persuasive smile I'd loved since she was little. I'll take care of it all, Mom. You've got enough on your mind. I signed. My hand trembled only once, at the bottom of the last page. Colin collected the documents with practiced precision, sliding them into a leather folder. We'll file these first thing tomorrow, he said. And then, as he zipped it closed, he gave me a reassuring nod. You're making a wise choice. After they left, the house felt heavier, though I couldn't explain why. I sat at the table, staring at the indentations the pen had left in the paper beneath the copies. For the first time since Mark's passing, I felt the weight of silence pressing against me like a warning I couldn't yet hear. In the months that followed, Marissa's visits grew brisker, more transactional. She'd call about utility bills, home insurance, the garden maintenance. Sometimes she brought Colin, sometimes not. They both talked in clipped tones, using words like valuation and equity. I told myself it was just her profession. Real estate was her language now, but the way she looked at the house began to unsettle me. It was no longer her childhood home. It was an asset. One afternoon, I caught her standing by the living room window, staring out toward the street where the maples lined the curb. You know, she said, almost casually, if you ever decided to sell, you could make a small fortune. People love these old colonials. I'm not selling, I said. My voice surprised us both with its firmness. She turned, smiling, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or calculation. Of course not. Mom, she said quickly, I didn't mean now, just someday. That night, I went to bed uneasy. I thought about Mark and how he'd always insisted on reading every document twice. He'd have caught whatever I'd missed. He'd have asked the right questions. Instead, I'd trusted my daughter. Spring came, and with it, a new rhythm to our distance. Marissa called less. Colin never called at all. When the first property tax notice arrived addressed to Ellen and Marissa Holt, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the ink as if my name had been joined to a stranger's. By then, the paper I'd signed was already filed, stamped, and sealed. Whatever it had set in motion was already too far ahead for me to see. All I knew was that something fundamental had shifted something quiet, invisible, but irreversible. That was the spring I began locking the doors at night, not out of fear of the world outside, but because for the first time, I wasn't sure who might walk in. The first thing I noticed was the new mailbox key. It arrived inside an envelope labeled Updated Access, as if the change were routine. Marissa had mentioned something about modernizing the locks, claiming the old one was sticking. I thanked her, even though I didn't remember asking for a change. The key was shiny, unfamiliar, too smooth to belong to this house. Not long after, I realized the spare key I kept under the porch mat was missing. It had been there for decades, taped inside a rusted tin that Mark used to keep screws in. I crouched down to check. One morning, brushing away damp leaves, the tin was gone, only a faint square of dry wood marking its place. When I asked Marissa about it, she laughed softly. "Mom, anyone could have found it. I just removed it for safety." Her voice was gentle, the same tone she used when I'd forget a date or lose my glasses. "You worry too much." Maybe she was right. I told myself grief was still playing tricks on me. Losing Mark had rewired my sense of safety. Every creak of the floorboard felt like a warning. Every misplaced object a small betrayal. So when little things shifted around the house, the clock in the hallway moved to another wall, the ceramic bird on the mantel replaced with a minimalist vase, I stayed quiet. Marissa called these changes refreshes. She said they made the house more current, that it was what buyers look for. Buyers. I laughed it off when she said it, assuming she meant future buyers someday, not now, but the word lingered, like a smell that wouldn't fade. Her visits became shorter, too polished. She'd bring coffee, talk about listings, and remind me to let Colin handle the maintenance schedules. I hadn't realized there was now a schedule. When I asked about it, she smiled, brushing my question aside. "You don't need to worry about the logistics, Mom. I've got it handled." Sometimes she'd arrive unannounced with a maintenance crew. They walked through the house with clipboards, measuring, muttering about updates. About one afternoon, a young man asked if I wanted the front windows replaced. "They'll increase your property value," he said. I told him they were fine as they were, but when I woke the next morning, there were bright orange stickers on the frames, work scheduled for next week. I called Marissa that evening, voice trembling. "I didn't approve any of this, Mom." She sighed. "You're overthinking. Everything's for your benefit. Trust me." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the house felt less like a home now, more like a showroom. My belongings were being edited, my choices softened to match someone else's vision. Even the smell had changed, no longer the warm mix of wood polish and lavender I used for years, but something crisp and sterile, like an open house. That night, I stood in the living room and listened. The silence was heavier than it used to be, the kind that settles after voices have learned not to argue. Upstairs, the faint hum of a new lock echoed as the door clicked shut. I stared at the shiny key in my hand, the one that no longer fit quite right, and told myself it was just grief, reshaping everything I thought I knew. Chapter 6. The Night of the Lock. The rain began before I left the church parking lot, a slow drizzle that thickened into steady sheets as I turned onto Hawthorne Street. The wipers thudded uselessly against the glass, smearing the reflections of streetlights into trembling streaks. When the house came into view, its porch light glowed faintly through the downpour, flickering like a heartbeat. I remember thinking how warm it looked. Safe. My arms were full leftovers from the church supper. A cup of coffee gone cold, my umbrella tucked under one arm. By the time I reached the porch, water ran down my sleeves. I found my key and slid it into the lock. It stuck. I tried again, twisting harder. The key turned halfway, then stopped. The porch light buzzed above me, dimming once, twice. I knocked softly, then louder. Marissa, it's me. For a moment. Silence. Then, footsteps on the hardwood. The door opened just enough for her voice to slip through. Mom, she said carefully, please don't make this ugly. Her tone was calm, detached, too professional for a daughter speaking to her mother. What are you talking about? My key won't work. I changed the locks, she said. It's better this way. My heart lurched. Better for who? For you too, she said. And I could hear Colin's low voice behind her. You'll thank me later. Mom, this arrangement isn't sustainable. We've talked about this. No, I whispered. We haven't. Her shadow shifted against the glass. It's complicated. I packed some of your things there in the garage. Maybe take some time, clear your head. Marissa, I said, pressing my palm against the door, the wood cold under my hand. This is my home. She didn't answer right away. Then her voice softened, almost breaking. I'm sorry, Mom, but it's done. The door closed. Rain spilled off the roof. Drumming against the steps, the porch light steadied, casting its pale glow over the slick boards. I stood there, drenched, the foil tray slipping from my hands. The world blurred around me, a watercolor of light and water. I walked to the garage. 2 boxes sat by the door, Mark's tools and winter coats. They were damp, their corners soft from the leak in the roof. No suitcase, no toiletries. Just pieces of a life someone else had decided to shrink. Back in the car, I sat shivering. Rain dripping from my hair, the faint smell of pine air freshener in the stale air. I turned the key, but the engine sputtered and died. I didn't try again. Hours passed. The rain softened to a mist. I watched the house through the windshield, the curtains drawn. Kitchen light glowing. I could see them moving inside. 2 shadows where I no longer belonged. At midnight, I checked my phone. No messages. No apology. Just my reflection staring back, pale, hollow, unrecognizable. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? My daughter locked me out of my own home. It sounded like a bad dream no one would believe. When dawn came, the rain finally stopped. The lock on the door glinted in the first light, a small, cruel jewel. I sat there a little longer, hands gripping the steering wheel, then turned the key again. The car started. I drove away slowly. The porch light shrinking behind me, still flickering on, off, on again. The dawn light was the color of old paper faded. Thin, unwilling to warm anything. I sat on a metal bench at the Portland bus depot, clutching my handbag with both hands, afraid that if I loosened my grip, the world might take that from me too. My coat was still damp from the night before. The scent of rain clung to it, mixed with the faint metallic tang of exhaust and coffee drifting from the station kiosk. Around me, the depot stirred to life. Commuters shuffled through with purpose, jackets zipped, phones in hand. None of them looked twice at me, which was a kind of mercy. My reflection in the glass wall was soft and colorless, a ghost among travelers. I tried to remember the last time I'd been here, maybe years ago, when Marissa was still in college, and I'd come to see her off on a trip to Seattle. She'd turned at the gate, waving, calling out, "Don't cry. Mom, it's just a weekend." I'd cried anyway. Now, the same seats, the same tiles felt foreign. I set my handbag beside me and pulled out the only things I'd brought from the car, a folded envelope of bills and a grocery receipt still damp at the edges. The ink had begun to blur, the numbers bleeding together. These scraps, meaningless to anyone else, felt like the last evidence that my life existed somewhere other than in memory. I sat there until the chill started to seep through my shoes. The depot doors opened with a squeak, letting in a burst of cold air and the smell of wet pavement. A man's voice cut through the noise. "Mrs. Keating." I looked up. At first, I thought I was imagining it. He was wrapped in a heavy coat, his cap pulled low, but then I recognized the stoop of his shoulders, the slow, deliberate walk. "Mr. Yates," I whispered. He'd been my neighbor for almost 20 years before moving 2 blocks away after his wife passed. He'd always been kind, practical, a man of few words who fixed his own gutters and still mowed his lawn by hand. He sat down beside me, setting a steaming paper cup on the bench. "You looked like you could use this," he said. The smell of coffee hit me like a memory. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat soak into my fingers. "You shouldn't have," I murmured. He shrugged. "I was out early. Saw your car parked by the curb last night when I was walking the dog. Figured something wasn't right. For a while, we just sat there, watching buses pull in and out." "Finally," he asked. "She really did it." I nodded. My throat tightened around the words. "Changed the locks. Told me not to make it ugly." He let out a low whistle. "Well, that's a hell of a thing." His voice wasn't pitying, just steady. Grounded. "You built that house. Ellen, don't let them erase you." The sentence landed with more weight than I expected. It wasn't a command or advice. It was a statement of fact. "I don't even know where to start," I said softly. "You start by standing up," he said simply. "Then you figure the rest out. You've always been tougher than you think." He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small card, creased and slightly smudged. "Community Legal Office. They helped me when the insurance folks tried to cheat me after Martha died. Won't cost you a thing to ask questions." I turned the card over in my hand, tracing the embossed lettering. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. Gratitude felt too small. He stood, tucking his gloves into his pocket. "Come by the house later if you need a meal or a place to rest. Don't sit here too long. This place makes you forget who you are." And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd of morning travelers. I sat a few minutes longer, the coffee cooling in my hands, the card pressed between my fingers. Outside, the city was waking the traffic hum, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the faint warmth of light creeping over the roofs. For the first time since the door had closed behind me, I felt something stir beneath the numbness. It wasn't anger yet, or even courage, just a quiet pulse, the beginning of something that hadn't died after all. I slipped the card into my bag and stood, the bench creaking as I rose. The coffee was cold, but the air smelled like morning, and that was enough. Chapter 8. The cafe meeting. The cafe Mr. Yates had mentioned was small, tucked between a laundromat and an antique bookstore on Belmont Street. The morning rush had passed, leaving behind the low hum of an espresso machine and the faint scent of cinnamon and rain. I sat by the window, hands cupped around a mug I hadn't touched, watching raindrops gather and slide down the glass. Mr. Yates had said she could help me think straight. I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't looking for sympathy or a fight. I just wanted to understand how my own life had become something signed away in fine print. The bell above the door chimed softly, and a young woman walked in. She spotted me instantly and smiled, the kind of smile that was both kind and businesslike. "Mrs. Keating," she asked, offering her hand. "I'm Leah Moreno. Mr. Yates said you might stop by." She looked barely 30, her hair pulled back loosely, a notebook tucked under her arm, her eyes steady. Observant, had the calm of someone who'd already seen more than her age should allow. She slipped into the seat across from me and ordered a black coffee. Mr. Yates said you were a teacher. She said, my mom taught history in Salem. I grew up around lesson plans and chalk dust. Something about that detail disarmed me. I nodded. Yes, retired now. Leah opened a thin folder, its pages neatly tabbed. You don't have to tell me everything right away, she said. Just start with what happened. I took a breath. My daughter changed the locks. Said it was better this way. Said I'd thank her later. Leah didn't flinch. Do you have any documents from when the property was refinanced? I said slowly. Receipts, mortgage payments, a few statements. I paid most of it after Mark died, but I didn't keep everything together. That's fine, she said. Anything helps. Mortgage records, utilities, even repairs. They build a timeline. I gave a short, bitter laugh. A timeline of mistakes. Maybe. I trusted her. I signed whatever she told me to sign. Leah leaned forward slightly. That's not a mistake. That's what families are supposed to be built on. Unfortunately, trust can be used like leverage. Her words were matter of fact, not cruel. From what you've said, this could fall under undue influence or financial coercion, she continued. If your name was ever on the deed, you might still have a claim. But I'll need proof payments, correspondence, anything showing you contributed. I hesitated. You think I could actually fight this? You can understand it, she said gently. And once you understand it, you can decide what to do with that truth. It wasn't quite hope that stirred in me, but something close clarity. Maybe. Leah slid a business card across the table. I work with a community legal clinic downtown. We take cases like yours pro bono. Bring me whatever you have, and we'll start sorting it out. I stared at the card, tracing her name embossed in silver. I don't know if I can go through all this again, I murmured. She's still my daughter. Leah nodded. I understand, but defending yourself isn't hurting her. It's just setting the record straight. Outside, the rain had softened to mist. Leah finished her coffee and stood, fastening her coat. Bring me the truth. Mrs. Keating, she said, smiling. We'll take it from there. After she left, I sat a while longer. The card warm in my hand. The rain stopped completely, leaving faint streaks of sunlight breaking through the gray. I drained my cold coffee, stood, and felt the first fragile pulse of something I hadn't felt in months, a reason to begin again. The storage unit sat on the far edge of town, behind an industrial park that smelled faintly of rust and rain. When I lifted the metal door, a wave of cool, stale air rolled out paper, cardboard, and time. Dust drifted through a slit of morning light, turning the air silver. Boxes were stacked high, marked in Mark's careful handwriting. Taxes, 1998-2004. Home repairs. School records. His handwriting steadied me the way his voice used to. I stepped inside. The concrete floor chilled my feet through my shoes. In the corner, a spider's web shimmered with dew, trembling whenever I moved another box. Leah's words echoed in my mind. Anything helps. Receipts, bills, proof of payment. They tell a story. I started with the nearest box. Inside were brittle envelopes, yellowed at the edges, smelling of mildew and ink. Each one carried a small fragment of my life mortgage statements with my name, utility bills marked paid, handwritten notes reminding me of due dates. I sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting them into piles, my fingertips smudged gray with dust. As I read, memories began to stir, ordinary days I'd forgotten, now returning in ink and numbers. A receipt for the new water heater in 1993. An invoice from the porch repair after the ice storm of 2002. A check for roof shingles, 3,000, 245 or 67 thalers in my handwriting. I remembered standing beside Mark, handing him nails while Marissa played in the yard. These weren't just bills. They were proof of the invisible labor that had kept our home alive. Every late-night phone call to the bank, every bill paid from my teaching salary, every quiet act of repair that no one else saw. By the time I reached the third box, my back ached. The evidence grew decades of quiet contributions that formed the spine of that house. Leah would know how to make them matter. Then I realized something was missing. The checkbooks. There should have been 3 of them, thick with carbon copies, my record of years when I'd paid the mortgage directly. Long after Marissa said she'd handle the finances, I searched the shelves again, pulling open boxes, flipping through folders, tossing aside old photo albums and instruction manuals. Nothing. My chest tightened. Without them, everything was weaker, less tangible. I sank onto the floor, my palms pressed against the cold concrete. For a moment, I felt foolish for thinking I could win this, for believing paper could stand against betrayal, written in blood. Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel. I turned to see Mr. Yates, coat zipped up, thermos in hand. "Found you," he said, stepping into the light. "Your car's out front. Looks like history exploded in here. I can't find my checkbooks," I said, my voice shaking. "They're gone. I had them all together." He crouched beside me. "Take a breath," he said evenly. "Where'd you last see them in the house? Maybe I packed them before she changed the locks." He nodded. "You checked your trunk," I blinked. "Just tools and an emergency kit. Let's look anyway." We stepped outside. The morning air was sharper now, tinged with light rain. He began digging through the trunk blanket, jumper cables, cleaning rags until his hand stilled. He pulled out a plastic sleeve wedged behind the tire well, its corner torn. Inside were the 3 checkbooks. Dusty, but dry. "Is this what you were hunting?" My knees nearly gave out. "Yes," he smiled faintly. "See, the world's not entirely cruel." I took them, pressing them to my chest. Their weight steadied me in a way words never could. Back inside, he poured me coffee from his thermos. It was bitter, grounding. As I sat among the papers, the panic dissolved, replaced by something colder, sharper resolve. These weren't just records. They were my truth, written line by line. Marissa could change the locks, but she couldn't rewrite what I'd built. When I left, the checkbooks rode beside me on the passenger seat, sealed in a clean envelope. The rain had stopped in the rearview mirror. The clouds were thinning, and somewhere beyond them, I imagined the house, the roof I paid for, the porch I painted, still standing because I had kept it alive. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in Leah's office, papers spread across the desk like a map of my entire adult life. Rain streaked the window, tracing crooked lines down the glass. Leah was on the phone with the courthouse, confirming the filing details. Her voice calm and efficient. My hands rested on the folder in front of me, the one that held my checkbooks. Receipts? And mortgage records? Everything I'd gathered over the past week. When my phone buzzed, I didn't recognize the number at first, but I knew the voice the second it spoke. "Mom, what are you doing?" Marissa's tone wasn't angry yet. It was careful, almost rehearsed. I hesitated before answering. "I'm making things right. You can't sue your own daughter," she said, her voice tightening. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? What people will say?" I looked out the window at the passing cars, their reflections gliding across the wet street. "I'm not suing family," I said slowly. "I'm defending truth." For a moment, there was silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Short and sharp. Then the anger came. Low at first. Then rising. You're letting that lawyer manipulate you. You're destroying everything we've built. You're making this ugly. Mom, I wanted to remind her that she'd already used those words. Don't make this ugly the night she locked me out, but I didn't. Leah glanced up from her desk, reading my face, and mouthed, "Are you okay?" I nodded. "Marissa," I said softly, "you took my home. You took my name off the mail, the bills, the locks. You told me to go. All I'm doing is showing what's real." She exhaled hard, a sharp hiss through the phone. "You think a few old receipts mean anything? That house is mine now. You signed it over." My throat tightened, but my voice didn't shake. "I signed what you asked because I trusted you. That doesn't mean you own me or my life's work." Her reply came cold and clipped. "You'll regret this." Before I could respond, the line went dead. Leah placed her phone down and studied me quietly. "She'll push back," she said. "Most do. But what matters is that your claim is sound. We're not challenging her as a daughter. We're asserting your right as a co-owner by contribution." Her words steadied me. They stripped the emotion from what I'd been drowning in and turned it into something clear, tangible, legal. Proof, not pleading. I watched as she gathered the documents into a new folder, labeling it Keating versus Holt. Property equity claim. She slid it into her briefcase and clicked it shut. The sound was sharp. Final. "It's filed," she said. Standing. "From here on, they can't touch the house without your consent. The court will review the claim within 2 weeks." I nodded, still holding my phone, its screen dark. For years, I had carried the weight of motherhood as if it were armor, protecting, absorbing, forgiving. But now, for the first time, I felt what it meant to set it down, to draw a line not in anger but in clarity. Leah handed me a copy of the filing. The official seal faintly embossed at the bottom. It felt heavier than paper should. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky had thinned to a pale gray, the kind that usually comes before light. I slipped the document into my bag, thanked Leah, and walked out into the cool air. The city smelled clean again, almost new. For the first time in months, I felt taller. 2 days after the claim was filed, my debit card stopped working. I tried again at the grocery checkout, thinking it was a network glitch, but the screen flashed, declined twice. The cashier looked at me with quiet sympathy as I fumbled for cash I didn't have. At the bank, the manager pulled up my account, his polite tone thinning. "It seems there's been a hold placed joint authorization required to release funds." Joint, Marissa's name. I'd forgotten she'd attached herself to the account when we refinanced the house. By evening, I learned the rest. A neighbor called, hesitant. "Ellen, I ran into Marissa at the market. She said you've been confused lately, forgetting things." The word confused burned. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe. The shame came first, then the anger. She was painting me as senile, unstable, just enough to discredit me, to make my claim look cruel instead of fair. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body shook with the small, contained panic of someone realizing their own child had become an adversary. The phone stayed dark until morning. When I arrived at Leah's office, I could barely speak. She froze everything. I said, "She's saying I'm losing my mind." Leah didn't flinch. "That's a common tactic," she said evenly, turning her screen toward me, "but we anticipated it." She clicked a few keys, then handed me a printed document, a stamped court order, signed and sealed. "The judge approved emergency access to your funds this morning. She can't touch a cent now." I stared at the page until the letters steadied. Leah's voice softened. The truth is starting to speak, Ellen. Don't let her noise drown it. For the first time in days, I breathed without shaking. The mediation room was colder than I expected. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile glow too bright, too sharp, as if the air itself had been scrubbed clean of warmth. A long table divided the space, polished to a shine, surrounded by chairs that looked more comfortable than they felt. Leah and I arrived early. She arranged her files in neat stacks binders thick with papers, labeled in her precise handwriting. Mortgage statements, receipts, maintenance records. She glanced at me once, her expression calm but alert. "They'll try to provoke you," she said quietly. "Don't give them what they came for." I nodded, my hands folded in my lap. The faint hum of a vent filled the silence. A few minutes later, the door opened. Marissa walked in first, her heels clicking against the tile. She wore a tailored blazer, hair pulled back, every detail of her appearance rehearsed. Behind her came Colin Smug, confident, with that permanent air of control that had once fooled me into thinking he was helping. He gave me a polite nod. "Ellen," I returned it, but my voice didn't rise to meet his. The mediator, a gray-haired woman with wire-rimmed glasses, took her place at the head of the table. She greeted everyone with a professional smile. "We're here to discuss ownership claims and contributions toward the Hawthorne property. Let's begin with the petitioner's counsel." Leah rose smoothly, sliding one of the binders across the table. "These documents represent over 30 years of direct contributions made by my client: mortgage payments, renovations, utilities, and property taxes. All verified." Colin gave a small laugh, low and dismissive. "Old household bills don't prove ownership," he said. "You can't assign equity to sentiment." Leah didn't blink. "We're not claiming sentiment," she said evenly. "We're proving investment." The mediator nodded, motioning for her to continue. Leah opened the binder and began reading check numbers, dates, amounts. Each one was like a heartbeat echoing through the room. Marissa shifted in her seat. At first, her posture was confident, almost defiant. But with each document Leah presented, her gaze wavered. The papers told a story no one could rewrite: the water heater repair Ellen had paid for, the roofing contractor she'd hired, the property tax receipts that bore her signature year after year. Leah flipped to the last section. "These are the canceled checks, recovered from storage, each one drawn from my client's account, deposited into the joint mortgage." Colin leaned forward, his smirk faltering. He reached for one of the pages, scanning it quickly, then another. His fingers tightened around the binder's edge. "This doesn't prove intent," he muttered. "Families help each other. That's not ownership." Leah's tone didn't change. "Families don't remove names from deeds after accepting 30 years of help. They don't change locks and cut off access." Marissa's eyes flashed, but she didn't speak. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. The mediator cleared her throat, jotting a note. "These are substantial contributions," she said finally. "They warrant review." I watched Marissa's face, then saw the first crack in her certainty, the realization that control was slipping through her hands. For the first time since the night she locked me out, she looked small, almost frightened. Colin sat back, his jaw tight. The confidence that had filled the room when they walked in was gone, replaced by something quieter, uncertain. Leah gathered her papers calmly. "We'll provide full copies to the court tomorrow," she said. As we left, I didn't look back. The sound of the fluorescent lights followed us down the hallway, humming like a clock, counting down to the inevitable. 2 mornings after the mediation, I woke to the sound of rain against the motel window, steady, gentle, almost kind. For once, I didn't feel dread curling at the edges of the day. My body still ached from restless sleep, but the heaviness that had followed me for weeks seemed thinner now, easier to breathe through. I made coffee in the small pot on the counter and sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the muted television without really seeing it. At 9 sharp, my phone buzzed with a message from Leah. "Check your email. You'll want to see this." For a second, my stomach tightened. Every message lately had carried bad news, frozen accounts, accusations, lies. But there was something different in Leah's tone. A calm confidence beneath the words. I opened my laptop and clicked. The subject line read correspondence from opposing counsel. Urgent. I hesitated before opening it. The email was short. 5 lines. Maybe 6. Leah had forwarded it with no commentary, just the original text preserved in its careful, formal language. "We have a serious problem. Upon further review, our client's title claim appears to lack clear ownership. We request a discussion to explore settlement options before proceeding further in court." That was it. No spin. No excuses. Just the quiet unraveling of their certainty. For a long moment, I sat perfectly still. Then, unexpectedly, I laughed. It came out rough and quiet at first, like something cracking open after too long in the dark. The sound startled me. I hadn't heard my own laughter in months. It wasn't joy exactly. It was relief, recognition, the sense that truth, after being buried under so many polished lies, had finally pushed its way back to the surface. When Leah called a few minutes later, her tone was measured but triumphant. "They're folding," she said. "They know the documentation is airtight. The court won't side with them on ownership. Not with what we've submitted." I listened, the words washing over me. Steady and factual. "So what happens now? They'll likely propose a buyout," Leah replied. "You can agree to sell your share or force liquidation of the entire property. Either way, it's leverage. Real, legal leverage. They can't erase you anymore." I exhaled slowly, my hand resting over my chest. I thought about all the years spent keeping that house alive, the gutters cleaned, the floors polished, the bills paid on time, how invisible all that work had felt. And yet, here it was, speaking for itself. "Thank you," I said, "for believing me when I barely did." Leah's voice softened. "You did the hard part. Ellen, you remembered who you are." After the call, I closed the laptop and stared out the window. The rain had stopped, and sunlight was breaking through in fractured beams, lighting the wet asphalt outside. For the first time, the silence in the room didn't feel empty. It felt earned. It felt like peace. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip, watching the light stretch across the street and let the quiet stay a little longer. The courthouse in downtown Portland smelled faintly of rain and old paper. Its marble floors echoed under every step, and the fluorescent lights above cast a pale, unwavering glow that made everyone look a little tired, a little exposed. Leah and I arrived early, carrying only one box, this time the final set of documents, carefully arranged in folders she'd marked with small yellow tabs. "Whatever happens," she said quietly as we waited outside the courtroom, "you've already done what most people never do. You told the truth, and you made it hold up." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. The hallway buzzed with the low murmur of other cases, other lives waiting to be decided. When the clerk called our names, we walked inside. The room was smaller than I expected. Simple wooden benches, a raised judge's bench, the flag hanging slightly askew behind it. Across the aisle sat Marissa and Colin. He looked pale, his usual confidence reduced to a tight jaw and a stack of crumpled notes. Marissa's eyes were red, though I couldn't tell whether from tears or exhaustion. She didn't meet my gaze. The bailiff called for order, and the judge, a woman with silver hair pulled neatly back, adjusted her glasses and began. "We're here to determine equitable ownership in the property located on Hawthorne Street," she said. her tone brisk but not unkind. Proceed. Leah stood first. Calm. Composed. She began laying out the facts with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every syllable but still spoke from conviction. My client, Mrs. Ellen Keating, contributed financially and physically to the property in question for over 3 decades. She said, despite her name's removal from the title during a refinance conducted under alleged familial trust, her financial participation remained ongoing and verifiable. She opened the binder and held up the missing checkbook, the same one I'd thought lost forever. These are direct payments toward the mortgage made by my client over a period of 9 years, all endorsed by the lending institution and deposited into the joint account held at the time by both parties. Colin rose, objecting immediately. Those were gifts. He said, his voice strained. Support from parent to child. Common family practice. The judge glanced at him. Do you have documentation to support that claim? He hesitated. No, Your Honor. But Leah's voice cut in smoothly. What we do have, Your Honor, are text messages and emails from the respondents explicitly requesting those payments as temporary help with assurances of repayment. Additionally, my client continued to pay property taxes and maintenance costs after her removal from the deed, demonstrating her belief of shared ownership. The judge turned the pages carefully, reading in silence. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. Proceed with testimony. Marissa was called to the stand. Her hands shook as she swore in. For a moment, she looked small, almost the girl I once knew. I didn't mean to hurt her, she said, her voice breaking. It was Colin's idea to handle the refinancing. I thought it would simplify things. I didn't think... She stopped, tears spilling over. I didn't think she'd take it like this. Leah didn't interrupt, just let the words hang there. When the silence grew heavy, she spoke softly. Mrs. Holt, did you or did you not change the locks on your mother's house without notice? Marissa wiped her eyes. Yes, but I was trying to protect. And did you, following that, restrict her access to joint funds and tell others she was experiencing memory problems? Her voice faltered. I didn't mean to. That will be all, Leah said quietly. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was measured, deliberate. The evidence demonstrates a sustained pattern of financial contribution and maintenance from Mrs. Keating. The respondent's claims of gift-based support are unsupported and inconsistent. This court recognizes Mrs. Keating as the sole legal owner of the property in question. The sound that followed wasn't applause or outcry, just the sharp echo of the gavel striking wood. Final, irreversible. I didn't move at first. The words took a moment to reach me fully. Full ownership restored. My house was mine again. Marissa sat frozen, her face wet, her hands trembling. Colin leaned toward her, whispering something, but she didn't respond. When she finally looked at me, it wasn't hatred I saw, it was something closer to disbelief. Leah touched my arm gently. It's over, she said. As we walked out into the afternoon light, the clouds were breaking apart, sunlight filtering through in thin golden streaks. The world outside felt bigger than it had in months, alive again. Still, beneath the relief, something ached, a hollow space where love used to live. The truth had won, but it had taken something with it. News of Colin leaving came quietly, through Leah. They've filed for separation, she said one afternoon, her tone measured. Apparently, there were more financial issues than they let on. The house has liens from his business debts. For a moment, I didn't speak. The words didn't sting the way I thought they would. They just settled somewhere deep, like the final weight on a scale that had long been tipping. They'll have to sell, Leah added. You can demand full control of the proceeds, or negotiate a sale through court. It's your choice. I looked at the papers in her hand, clean, official, without malice. I won't destroy her, I said finally. Just make it right. The sale moved quickly. The house on Hawthorne Street, our house was listed within weeks. I walked through it one last time with the movers, watching them pack the fragments of my life into boxes marked kitchen, study, miscellaneous. The walls echoed differently now. The air smelled of cardboard and faint lemon cleaner instead of paint and history. In the living room, a man was wrapping the old maple-framed mirror that had hung over the mantel for 40 years. I stopped him. "Leave that," I said softly. He nodded and set it aside. Marissa didn't come. She'd sent word through her attorney that she couldn't face the process. I wasn't sure if that was shame or pride speaking. Maybe both. When the truck pulled away, I stood on the porch and looked out over the maple trees Mark and I had planted so long ago. Their leaves were gold now, the kind that fall gently and land without sound. I thought about the years I had poured into this place, the laughter, the labor, the losses. It wasn't the house itself that hurt to leave behind. It was the ghosts of everything that had once felt safe inside it. Leah's car pulled up at the curb. She stepped out, smiling softly. "You ready?" I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I think I've been ready for a while." We drove away in silence, the house shrinking in the mirror until it disappeared completely behind the bend of the street. The house was almost bare when I returned for the last time. The rooms sounded different without furniture, their emptiness amplifying every small noise, the creak of a floorboard, the distant hum of wind through the maple branches outside. Dust floated through the air in slow spirals, catching the late afternoon light. I walked through each room slowly, my hand grazing the walls. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon and paint, the scent of preparation for someone else's beginning. The living room, once so full of laughter and arguments and birthdays, was nothing but open space now. Even the nail holes where pictures had hung seemed to stare back, quiet witnesses to everything that had come and gone. In the hallway, I stopped at the spot where Mark used to keep his boots. The scuffed mark still faintly visible on the floor. I could almost hear him calling from the porch, telling me he'd be in soon, asking for coffee. It was strange how grief softens, how it folds into memory until it no longer burns but hums softly, like the echo of a familiar song. Outside, the sun was lowering, setting the sky over Hawthorne Street in pale gold. I stepped onto the porch, the boards warm beneath my feet. The maple trees rustled above, their leaves whispering in the same rhythm they had for decades. The light fixture by the door was still there, the one Mark had wired himself the summer we moved in. He'd called it his good luck light, saying every home needed something that stayed on, even in storms. I reached up, flicked the switch, and the bulb glowed to life, steady, warm, unwavering. For a long time, I just stood there, watching the light spill across the steps and into the growing dusk. "This light isn't for waiting anymore," I whispered. "It's for peace." The air was cool now, the kind that carries both endings and beginnings in the same breath. I locked the door one last time, tucked the key into Leah's envelope, and set it on the windowsill. As I walked down the path toward the street, the light behind me stayed on, shining against the dark quiet, constant and wholly mine. The new townhouse was smaller, but it felt right, clean lines, soft light through the curtains, and a faint scent of rain drifting in from Selwood Park. The first night I spent there, I brewed coffee just to fill the rooms with something warm. The walls didn't carry echoes yet, only quiet. I realized I liked it that way. The locksmith had finished that morning. Leaving the new keys neatly on the counter, I turned one in my hand, admiring its shine. When it clicked into the front door, the sound was soft and certain. For the first time in a long while. That sound didn't mean fear or exclusion, it meant safety. I unpacked slowly over the next few days, one box at a time. The things I'd chosen to bring with me were few, but deliberate. Mark's old coffee mug, a framed photo of the maple trees in autumn, the porch light fixture I'd had replaced before the house sold. It now hung by my new door, wired by a kind handyman named Joe who'd refused extra payment. "Everyone deserves a good light," he'd said with a grin. By the third afternoon, the place felt almost lived in. The sound of children playing in the park drifted through the window, mingling with the smell of fresh rain on the pavement. I poured a cup of coffee, sat by the small table near the window, and let the quiet settle. That's when I saw it. An envelope slipped through the mail slot, cream-colored, my name written in Marissa's handwriting. For a long moment, I just looked at it. No anger rose, no ache, just stillness. I placed the envelope beside my coffee cup and didn't open it. Some things didn't need answers anymore. Some chapters closed without words. Outside, the porch light flickered on as dusk fell, casting a steady glow across the new door and the quiet street beyond. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the rain begin again, soft and forgiving, against the glass.